right, welcome back, Social 10. We are 2 days away from our final essay, and we have wrote this essay this year. And that is the most complicated, convoluted, difficult source that is imaginable. You're not going to see a source that is that wordy in Social 20 or Social 30. The reason why that source was so convoluted, so complicated, so wordy, was because we had a month to get ready for it, and we did it at home. What I need to do for you on Thursday is we need to simplify this. We want to make it more approachable. Okay? We're going to make it more approachable. So when I say make it more approachable, it's going to be the same essay. You're going to be talking about the same nuances, the same themes, but we're going to get rid of some of the clunky language. So for example, this essay begins, globalization built on the natural cornerstone that the strong do what they want and the weaker suffer what they must, provides a mirror to the exploitive nature of mankind. I think we could just say in the source on Thursday that man is exploitive, right? I can leave that rest of it for you to use to show me that man is exploitive. So on the prompt on Thursday, you're going to see the characteristics of man is exploitive attached to mankind. And in a moment, we'll talk about what case studies could you use to be very comprehensive to show that man is or is not exploitive. So this source, the whole first sentence, was talking about this natural cornerstone, and there's opportunity for you to use that as some of your evidence on Thursday. But we want to make this clunky language a little cleaner to work with. Then it says, in the spirit of competition, man changed the old and new worlds, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes intentionally, often brutally. We want to give you an opportunity on Thursday to show me that you understand the Columbian Exchange. That quote, that second sentence, is about the Columbian Exchange. So we want you on Thursday to be able to show us that mankind, humankind, peoplekind, us, we have changed the planet and we've changed each other. So the words inadvertent, intentional, and brutal may not be on the prompt on Thursday, but the wording of the prompt will allow you to talk about that. If you add this to your exploration of the prompt, you'll be able to elevate your mark up to an 80 or 100. So the reason why we looked at this language in December is so that it gives you the building blocks to do well now. So in the spirit of competition, man changed the old and new world, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes intentionally, often brutally. All we're going to need to say on Thursday is that mankind has changed the world. Because we're exploitive, because we're irrational, we've changed the world. And then I'll leave it to you to tell me about how man's changed the world. So if the source just says that mankind and our exploitive, irrational nature has changed the world, then if you then say, yeah, you know what, we've done it inadvertently, we've done it intentionally, we've done it brutally, then now you've taken the prompt and you have very specifically responded to it. So you're going to do very well with that. The final sentence says, only in the spirit of cooperation can man preserve the fragile remains. That's what we've been studying this month. And the last part of the essay, we'll be looking at, what is our goal? And our goal is a sustainable future. And how do we achieve that goal? In the spirit of cooperation. So, let me summarize a few things with you, and then we'll go through the process. The essay is meant to give us an opportunity to explore the big themes of the course. So one thing that you would do in Social 20 or Social 30 to prepare for an essay is to think about what are the big themes of the course. The big themes of this course have been obviously globalization. That's the biggest theme. So if the essay begins, globalization, this, and this, a part of your intro could be that globalization is a complicated theme or topic because it has been both a blessing and a curse for mankind. That the theme is complicated. That's the complexity of the topic. Now, you don't have to write pages and pages and pages, although some of you like to do that, about about the complicated nature of globalization, you could simply say it has created both great reality-changing opportunities, right? That's very concise language, and concise is an E. Great reality-changing opportunities. So a reality-changing opportunity might be something like a more diverse diet, or a reality-changing opportunity might be something in terms of the global market today, like a global marketplace where you have 1 billion customers to sell your product to. That's a reality-changing opportunity, that Canada has corporations that can sell beyond our borders, so therefore their profit potential is much larger. So the successful side of globalization, the positive side, is it has created both great reality-changing opportunities to spread things like democracy and women's rights, but at the same time, it has created some potentially fatal challenges. So I think that logically at the beginning of your essay, because the biggest theme of your essay is globalization, logically at the beginning of your essay, at the beginning of your analysis of source, right at the top, maybe your first or second sentence is to explore that, you know, the source is focused on the theme of globalization, and that theme is complicated because it is both a blessing and a curse. That on the positive side, it's created some great reality-changing opportunities, but on the negative side, we have these potentially fatal challenges. So just by introducing that, I believe you're giving yourself a chance to talk about the main theme, which is globalization. Now, to continue on, the second major theme with regards to globalization has been that we have shaped globalization, right? Globalization has been shaped by us, right? That's what we've been exploring this year. It's been shaped by us being exploitive. It's been shaped by us being irrational. So the source is going to begin globalization, and it gives you a chance to talk about, you know, what is this globalization and why is it complicated? And it's going to talk about how it's been shaped. The beginning of the source that's presented to you is presenting a problem. You know, globalization has been shaped by an exploitive man, or globalization's been shaped by an irrational man. If man is irrational, then our actions may lead to our demise. If man is exploitive, then our actions may lead to the demise of others. So a typical essay prompt will have a problem and a solution. Kind of hang on to it, please. A typical essay prompt will have a problem and a solution. So the problem might be something like globalization has been shaped by, you know, irrational nature of mankind. It's only through the, you know, a spirit of cooperation that we can fix it. So we have problem, we have solution. So in the beginning of my essay tomorrow, I might have an analysis of source where I introduce the topic. You know, the topic of the source is globalization. Globalization is both a blessing and a curse. Globalization's been able to create both great reality-changing opportunities, but also some potentially fatal challenges. The source presents it as being shaped by man's nature, man's exploitive nature, man's irrational nature. And the source suggests that our goal should be a sustainable future, but that's only possible if we cooperate. So, in terms of the steps we're talking about here, the steps of the analysis that we've done so far is, here's the theme. The theme is globalization. And then we talk about within that theme some of the big rocks of the course that we've been discussing. So in this case, the nature of mankind shaping globalization. And that's where we can get into this whole idea of the Columbian Exchange. And, you know, mankind has often brutally, intentionally, sometimes inadvertently changed the planet as we globalize. I think there's an opportunity for you to flesh that idea out. So if we say globalization shaped by the nature of mankind, it also allows us an opportunity to talk about that paradigm that we live in. Are we living for me, or are we living for we? So if we're saying globalization has been shaped by mankind and historically that's been bad, so now we need a paradigm shift so that we can have a future. Then what are we talking about? We're talking about individualism and collectivism. So another nuance of the source that you can announce is that the source is suggesting that the ideological paradigm that we are practicing may be critical for us to have a future. That some paradigms are not sustainable. That individualism unleashes selfishness and exploitation and some irrational behavior, some short-term vision, like the destruction of the biosphere for temporary economic gain. Here in Alberta, very controversially, the UCP government, they were talking about coal mining the Rockies. That gets us rich temporarily, but long-term, it's the destruction of the Rockies and some parkland that had been reserved as a nature preserve. So do we have 10 years of economic boom at the cost of forever destroying those parklands? Or do we have an economy that is weaker, but an economy that is not causing some destruction of the biosphere? So just today they announced that they will not be pursuing those coal mines at the moment in the Rockies, in those parklands. So they attempted to say, let's practice capitalism even on those crown lands that are meant to be animal preserves, and instead they're saying, you know what, that's not the right thing to do. So another nuance of the source will be, it's going to say that, you know, this is our problem, this is our solution, and within the problem and solution you should be able to see some kind of discussion about, should we be practicing individualism or should we be practicing collectivism? Should we be looking after the self-interest of us individually, or should we be thinking about our group, the common good, and not only the common good for Canadians alive today, but the common good for generations yet not born? What kind of world are we going to leave for them? So the essay, globalization, will be the big theme, but underneath that theme there will be other themes that you can talk about. The things we've been talking about all year. Things like the nature of mankind. Mankind's exploitive, mankind's irrational. This is the problem with globalization. The problem with globalization is because it reflects the problems within man. Now, globalization is not naturally good or evil. It's just we come together. What happens when we come together is subject to the nature of mankind. If we come together and we come together to do evil things, then globalization becomes flawed. So we'll have an opportunity to look at the analysis of source like that. The source has a solution, and within the solution there's going to be a bias. There's going to be some assumptions. So I've already told you that the solution is going to be this idea of spirit of cooperation can preserve the fragile remains. There's a bias there. There's an assumption that we can have a successful paradigm shift towards collectivism, and there's evidence that that doesn't work. They attempted that in the Soviet Union, and the hearts and minds of the people were lost, and the Soviet Union is no longer in existence. That time and time again, it seems like individualism and self-interest is what has been pushing society to new heights. You know, very few things are accomplished under the direction of government. You know, the great pioneers and leaders of today, you know, the Elon Musks and SpaceX and Tesla, they are doing it for individual glory and individual wealth creation. So you could argue that the source is making an assumption that is wrong, that a shift towards cooperation is possible. Maybe it's not in man's nature to cooperate. So, the analysis of source is the intro to the essay. And in the analysis of source, you should begin your first sentence by announcing the big theme. The big theme here is globalization. It's logical that you would explore that theme, talk about some of the complexity. The complexity of it is globalization has been both good and bad. It has, you know, unlocked great reality-changing opportunities, but it also has unlocked some potentially fatal challenges. So that's what makes it both complicated and significant. The significance is these challenges could be fatal. that if left unaddressed, the consequences, the externality of globalization could mean the death of birth and the end of life of our species. That's why Elon Musk wants to send 1,000 ships to Mars, because he thinks mankind's going to kill mankind on this planet. He thinks the only way that we have a long-term future is if we have a plan B. So that's the complexity and the significance. And beginning in your essay, in your analysis, I think you explore this is the theme, this is the complexity, this is the significance. So the theme is globalization, the complexity is it's done good and bad things. The significance is that, you know, potentially the problem that's being explored here, mankind's nature is you know, to lack of a better word, evil. We're exploitive, we're irrational. If we leave that unaddressed, we may destroy the biosphere. Therefore, we need a solution. And then the etological perspective of the source is the solution. The solution provided in the source is we need to embrace cooperation. What might that look like? The Paris agreements. That's one example of cooperation. What might a spirit of cooperation look like? Well, we should probably open our borders. Probably shouldn't have a border that is closed to refugees. It's not in the spirit of cooperation that we close our borders. So what would spirit of cooperation look like? Maybe open borders, maybe more climate agreements. You might want to explore some of the other significant language of the source. What does the fragile remains of the planet mean? When it says fragile, can that be quantified? And yes, it can be quantified. It can be quantified by looking at climate change. That as an externality of economic globalization, the climate has been changed. That there's global warming, that there's more extreme weather. The fragile remains might be other forms of ecological measurement. You can talk about animal extinction, habitat destruction. So another thing you can do in the intro, in the analysis, is to explore the language. You know, when they say fragile remains, this is what it means. So you can even have a sentence that says something like that. When the source states that, you know, globalization has left fragile remains, that can be quantified by looking at climate change, overpopulation, animal habitat destruction, deforestation, ozone depletion, air and water pollution. There it is. You have explored the significance of the language. You've quantified what they're saying. When they say something like sustainable future, what does sustainable future infer? Well, it infers, it doesn't outright say, but it infers that we need to deal with our ecological footprints. In order to have a sustainable future, we need to ensure that we don't exceed the carrying capacity of the planet. When it says sustainable future, there's also an assumption that we create an economy that has as a lifeblood a non-finite resource. You can't have a finite resource like oil as the lifeblood of a sustainable economy. So you can talk about some of the assumptions of the source. And then you can say, not everybody agrees with this. Some people would say cooperation is not the path to a future, because cooperation hasn't worked in the past. It's not likely to work in the future. Then once you do that, then you respond and say, boom, this is my thesis. In your thesis, let's have the big rocks. So the big rocks we're talking about seem to be, you know, is man exploitive? You should be thinking about, you know what, I'm going to talk about that word, exploitive, in my essay. And we're going to talk about that word in a minute in here. Is man irrational? Or maybe we're rational. It's okay to argue against the source. Is the earth fragile? It's okay to argue against that as well. Maybe you think that the fragility of the planet is overstated. Is cooperation the path to a sustainable future? So I think you need to build a thesis statement around the big rocks. You need to pull the big rocks out of the source. So a big thesis statement often is an although, but, therefore. Although, and this is the part you agree with the source, but this is the part you don't agree, and therefore. You don't have to have an although, but, therefore, but your thesis statement has to be a statement. It cannot be a question. A thesis statement is a statement. The lawyer doesn't say to the jury, is my client innocent? No, you want the lawyer to say, my client is innocent because of this, this, and this. You want them to be clear. So, although mankind has been exploitive and irrational, there has been a movement towards cooperation, and therefore we might have a sustainable future. No, I didn't. I didn't say but that time. Although mankind has had a history of being exploitive and irrational, there has been, or maybe but, currently we are moving towards cooperation, therefore we might have a sustainable future. Or you might be able to say, although mankind has been exploitive and irrational, but it's only through individualism that we can have a sustainable future. So I want you to wrestle with those big rocks. Pick the rocks that make sense to you, but the next thing we're going to do is talk about the big rocks. First big rock we need to talk about is exploitive. You're probably going to have a paragraph where you talk about mankind being exploitive. And in that paragraph, there's evidence that's more logical. There's evidence that could be more precise. The best evidence in a paragraph about exploitation in this course would be transatlantic slave trade. That's exploitation. Sweatshops, that's exploitation. Those are some pretty clear case studies of exploitation. The whole idea of imperialism, that's exploitation. The British exploited India. The Europeans exploited Africa. I'll get to your question at the end. The transnationals exploit sweatshop workers today. And during the slave trade, there's exploitation. So I think that you can prepare for a paragraph on exploitation, and there's some logical case studies. You can use other case studies. But if you talk about exploitation in a course where we studied the slave trade, and you don't bring it up, then the question might be, why not? Is your essay weakened because you left it out? And chances are it could be. Now, if you're arguing that mankind has not been exploitive, then maybe you would leave the slave trade out, unless you could somehow convince us that the slave trade was not based on exploitation. Then another nuance, another paragraph might be, not only have we been exploitive, but somehow we've created these fragile remains, right? Somehow we haven't done what's sensible, what's reasonable, what's rational, right? So we want to say, what's irrational? And we talked about a lot of irrational things. In the documentary, The Corporation, it's irrational for Monsanto to create a growth hormone to give to cows to produce more milk when the world is awash in milk. We have enough milk. We don't need more milk. But we're going to create RBGH, and RBGH is going to allow cows to create more milk, but it also is creating problems in cows, including cancer, that could be passed on through the pus to the consumers. So now we have milk that's dangerous, even though we had enough milk before. That's irrational. It's irrational to put profit ahead of public health. We have other examples of irrational in this course. Is it the rational thing to do for Alberta to invest heavily in shipping our natural resources only to the United States, so that when there's a presidential change, like there is, now the $1.5 billion that we've invested in the Keystone XL pipeline is lost, because Biden's not going to allow the pipeline to be finished. More rationally, we need to get our oil to the international market so we have more than one customer. We need to be able to sell to the Chinese. We need to be able to sell to Europe. We need to be able to sell to Latin America. We need to be able to sell to Africa. If you're only selling your product to one country, then that country can determine the value of your product. And Canada, more specifically Alberta, is losing billions because we haven't connected to the global market in a way that's rational. So what is irrational look like? Maybe it's irrational for us to have fruit from Venezuela shipped and packaged in Indonesia and sold and consumed in Toronto. You know, why are we picking fruit in Latin America, shipping it to Asia to be packaged, to eat it in Toronto? Maybe the whole idea of globalization has some flaws because of the distances involved are creating, you know, a ecological footprint that's preventable or avoidable if we consume locally. So in your body, you need to create a thesis statement that is built around the big rocks. And the big rocks include, you know, are we exploitive? Are we rational? Are we reasonable? Are we logical? Or are we changing the world brutally? You know, brutal changes to the world that are intentional. Some of the Columbian Exchange shows mankind's not rational, mankind is irrational. Or mankind might be, maybe we did it on purpose, but we did it to purposely be evil. The last part of your essay is your conclusion. And in your conclusion, you restate your thesis and you sum up your body arguments. That's it. If you run out of time on Thursday and you don't have time for a conclusion, that's okay. Having a concluding paragraph isn't going to move the needle, because you shouldn't be concluding stuff you haven't already argued. If I've been paying attention while I've been reading it, then the conclusion is just kind of like a recap of something I've already seen. You're not meant to bring in new information into the concluding paragraph. So to some extent, the concluding paragraph is a little pointless. So we have seen essays in Social 30 that get 30 out of 30 on the diploma, and they had no concluding paragraph. So what I'm saying is, in the conclusion, you're meant to summarize your argument. You're meant to summarize an argument you've already stated in the body. So don't spend a lot of time on the conclusion. Spend 5 minutes. In the conclusion, just copy and paste your thesis, sum up your argument. The biggest part of your essay on Thursday, you should spend, if we have 2.5 hours, spend about half an hour on the intro, just spend 2 hours on the body. You need a clear thesis statement, and you need your body paragraphs to be as specific, purposeful, and precise as possible. So how do you get precise evidence? If you know you want to talk about the Columbian Exchange as your example of mankind being irrational, then go back in your notes and get some specific stuff about the Columbian Exchange. You know, learn that, memorize that, so that you can talk about it on Thursday. If you know that when you get to the exploitive part, you want to talk about the slave trade, then go through your notes, get me some numbers, get me some dates, get me some specific ideas about it, so that you're not generally talking about the slave trade, but you can include some very specific and maybe some insightful thoughts. We have some quotes on the slave trade that are very insightful. Adding that to your evidence will bump you up to an E. So generally the S paper and the E paper, you can tell that they're often the same paper. You know, they're talking about the same things. It's just the E paper does them in a more precise way, more comprehensive way. Precise means like surgical. You know, this is a very specific, you know, quote or number that is supporting what I'm saying. Comprehensive means, you know, I'm not just telling you part of the story, I'm telling you everything that's important here. So in summary, in order to get ready for any essay, you need to identify what are the big rocks that we've been learning. This course is about globalization. So if you could prepare only one thing for Thursday, it would be that you should be able to begin your essay saying, you know, the theme of the source is globalization. Globalization is a complicated source because it has both led to, you know, blessings and curses. On the positive side, we have the great reality changing opportunities, but on the negative side, we also have these potentially fatal challenges. The significance of the source is that if left unaddressed, these potentially fatal challenges may be fatal. It could lead to the death of birth. Now within the source, it suggests a source of the problem is the nature of mankind, that we are why globalization is flawed. But it also presents a solution, a paradigm shift towards cooperation. Now there are some assumptions in the source that we can achieve such paradigm shift. We don't have a history of success of cooperation. The values associated with the ideological perspective are things like the common good and collective responsibility and maybe a sustainable future for our children. But not everybody would agree. Some capitalists like Adam Smith or entrepreneurs like Elon Musk would say that it's only through individualism and competition that we'll actually have a future outside of this planet. That's why he's investing heavily in SpaceX. I'll get to your question at the end. After you do that, then logically, it's like, here's my thoughts, and that's your thesis. And that's your introductory paragraph. It should take about a half an hour. Now, you should be ready. You should never go into an essay without an idea of what you might be thinking or talking about. So we've already talked generally about some of the big rocks on Thursday. So if I'm going to be talking about man being exploitive, I need to research a little bit about that. If I'm going to talk about mankind being reasonable or rational or wise, how am I going to say man's wise? How am I going to say that man's, what is the nature of mankind? And then we already know that the second part is going to be this idea that we need to cooperate to save ourselves. What does that cooperation look like? And then there's your essay. So I would argue that the A2 this week may actually be a little easier than the A1, because you don't know what the sources are tomorrow on the A1. But for the A2, I'm giving you a very clear understanding of what the big rocks are going to be here. So I'm going to stop recording, and we're going to go through question and answer for the A2. And we want to make sure that you feel comfortable with the A2. When you do, we'll have our mask break. When we get back from the mask break, we can do some multiple choice to get more ready for that.